My name is Grace, and today I'll be talking to you guys about the future of connecting communities through creative technology. So, today we will be discussing what creative technology is and how emerging technologies like augmented reality, as well as user generated content gaming platforms, will be essential to the future of how we build connections for communities. We'll talk about best practices and things to consider when designing for these mediums, as well as some trends and new developments. I would encourage everyone to imagine what if future ways of facilitating human connection, perhaps using some of these technologies that I'll discuss or others that you may be interested in, and then commenting your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to turn this into an asynchronous discussion with you all. First, a little bit about myself. I am a creative technologist with a background in architecture, marketing, and editorial. So, a lot of different things there, but funnily enough, I'm actually now using all of these different skill sets in my job. I'm from Hong Kong originally, and I studied business and marketing for college. And then I worked as a writer and editor at a few magazines after that. I hold a master's in architecture, and during my time in school there, I did a few interactive design classes where I became really interested in designing at the intersection of the physical and digital environments. And that's what led me to my path as a creative technologist. So, you might be wondering what is creative technology since I've mentioned that a few times by now. It's a pretty broad field, and I found that that definition can kind of vary quite a lot depending on the organization. But essentially, you can tell from the name that it's really a mix of creative and technology. So it's the combination of technology with artistic and design skills to create new experiences, products, and solutions. It's something that can enhance traditional creative methods, unlock new ways of expression, and inspire and improve design and experiences. Although I work for a marketing agency, it can be used in many different sectors and industries, including for businesses and also for more purely artistic approaches. My career is dedicated to designing and creating interactive environments across virtual and physical platforms with the goal of connecting communities. So, I'm currently a senior creative technologist at an experiential marketing agency called OBE, Onboard Experiential, and we're based in SF, LA, New York, and London. My roles there typically involve a combination of the creative use of technology, 3D design, and strategy, and I play a role in tying multiple strands of project and client parameters together to create unforgettable interactive activations. I'm usually involved throughout project cycles, so anywhere from the very beginning when we start pitching to clients, and then through concept development, design development, working with vendors on fabrication and production, all the way to on-site implementation. So, in my field, a lot of our work involves the bringing of communities together through creating an experience for them to come together, either physically or digitally or something in between. And then there, it's an opportunity for them to engage in something shared. Some of my project highlights as examples include creating a virtual 3D environment for a global beauty event for a huge beauty brand, an augmented reality future dining experience at a food festival, as well as an augmented reality exhibit for the Ville neighborhood in St. Louis. In my experience, the most impactful projects that I've worked on are instances where we pretty much had to use creative technology to bring people or stories together. That's when it really clicks and it really makes sense to integrate technology into these events and experiences. So, for example, with the project that I just mentioned for the Ville, that's something that we couldn't have done without creative technology because we couldn't have told the story of that community without their direct involvement. And the use of augmented reality allowed us to showcase audio recordings and archival photos and quotes in a way that was more integrated with the physical space that a different audience was in. And that was the only way to create a really multi-dimensional experience, sort of bringing these things across space and time almost. And it was a way for us to give enough credit to the community that we were speaking about. So now let me just get into some basic definitions to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Some of these terms are kind of relatively new, so there might not necessarily be agreed upon definitions, but just for a broad idea of what I'm speaking about when I use these terms. So what is augmented reality, which is AR for short? I have a little snippet from Google AI Summary, which puts it a lot better than I ever could. But they've said that AR stands for augmented reality, which is a technology that adds digital elements to a real world environment in real time. This can include sounds, graphics, text, and other virtual enhancements. Augmented reality can make a user's experience more immersive and enjoyable and can help them understand or enjoy something more. Um, Personally, I believe that AR is an essential component to the future of how we're going to experience the world and therefore also how we're going to interact with each other. Currently, there are already a wide variety of use cases in the experiential industry, from things like discovering new layers of information, virtual signage and navigation, unlocking content in a gamified way, playing like augmented reality games, to enhancing the design of the physical space with virtual elements. So there's an example here on the slide from the Singapore Tourism Board where they created an immersive AR guided tour to explore the city in a new way. This was done using the Google Geospatial Creator, which I'll dive a little deeper and later down in the presentation. But this is just one type of augmented reality that is anchored to a physical location. And there are a lot of other types of augmented reality that can be triggered, for example, by scanning an image, or on the flip side, you can also kind of track your face or body movements for a different kind of background to augment onto. And then another definition that I wanted to talk about was for virtual immersive environments. So these are computer-based simulations that allow users to navigate and interact with a 3D environment that may be real or imagined. This can be in the form of a custom-built virtual environment on the web that you access on your computer or phone, or it can be experienced as a full-on virtual reality with a headset, where you feel like you have actually stepped into that world. These virtual environments can be pretty much anything you imagine. So they can be something completely fantastical, or they can be really close to real world experiences, scenarios, or environments. They can also be used for many different purposes, including things like education, entertainment, and training. So industries that are kind of dedicated to all these different use cases of virtual reality. So definitely a lot to dive into further there if you're interested. Another type of virtual environment would be user-generated content game platforms. So something like Roblox or Fortnite, which you might have heard about. If you haven't heard about them, they are a little harder to purely describe. So I would suggest kind of just going on the web and taking a quick look at them. They're free to access. But Roblox, for example, would define themselves as the ultimate virtual universe that lets you create, share experiences with friends, and be anything you can imagine. So the reason why these are known as user-generated content gaming platforms specifically is because they allow users to create, share, and monetize digital content for games, which kind of adds a whole other layer to that community building. And then finally, there are a lot of overlaps and commonalities in these two areas through the broader umbrella of the metaverse, which I also felt like I had to mention here. The word metaverse has been kind of overused by Meta previously in the past couple of years. but there isn't really an agreed upon definition of that word yet because it's still very much in development and it exists outside of the meta ecosystem as well. It's more broadly thought of as kind of the next 3D version of the internet. And in the future, this could be a network of online worlds in which we experience physical, augmented and virtual realities that interact with each other. So that's why this is kind of like a more overarching concept um, over the augmented reality and virtual immersive environments. Um, this is a really rapidly growing space, so a really exciting place to be at. Um, According to Statista, in 2023, it was estimated that that market stood at 94.1 billion USD. And then in 2024, it's expected to rise to 130 billion before surging to over 1 trillion US dollars by 2030. So even though the term metaverse has kind of lost its momentum a little bit in the past year as AI became a lot more of a trendier term, I think that this does really feel like, even though there are uncertainties, this is the direction that the internet and how we experience computers and human computer interaction is moving towards in the future with more spatial and 3D ways of experiencing the digital world rather than the 2D version that we have had thus far. So, how does this connect to the topic of connecting communities? How do we use these tools for different groups of people to interact? So, the general trend that we're seeing here is a rise in the demand for digital content. And this is where people are spending their time. So, this is where we kind of have to go to reach people. Social augmented reality is one category of AR with more immediate implications on how they can be used to connect communities. So, examples of this would be Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok. These are all social media platforms that people already spend a lot of their time socializing, but they all also have the capacity to create AR layers and experiences. So these were built to create and share content, but they also are offering more and more immersive capabilities now. And so that creates an opportunity for users to create content that is more exciting and imaginative than perhaps just a traditional like video recording or image photo taking, but more of something that can fully immerse the user as well as the audience by using their face, their body, and their environment to bring these things to life. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention is web-based AR. So this is a little bit different from social AR because it allows for more custom web-based experiences where we can create more extended content that kind of goes beyond these walled gardens of social platforms. There are a lot more limitations in the social platforms because they are under these broader social companies. But with web AR, there's just so much freedom in whatever you want to create. So as I mentioned, I worked on a project where I built an web AR experience that brought to life the history of a community to another audience and location. And that was something that would not have been possible on social AR, that is possible on web AR. Um, and then lastly, for virtual immersive environments, in the case of UGC gaming platforms, this is where an audience or a group of people may already be spending a lot of their time. So, for example, Gen Zers spend a lot of their time on Roblox, and they may also form smaller groups or subcultures depending on their interests. In the case of more custom built environments, a 3D virtual space can provide a place to meet other like minded individuals live, very importantly, and that feels, in a way, a lot more immersive than just a text chat or a discussion forum or other asynchronous methods of connecting. So, this is much closer to how we would interact in real life, with a digital avatar that represents you, while being able to surmount the challenges of time or cost to travel and meet someone in person. So after all of that background information, now that we're all kind of aligned there, I wanted to speak to some best practices or just considerations to think about in using these platforms for connecting communities. So whether it's your kind of first time delving into these platforms, and there are so many free tools out there to explore, or if you're a little further down the road, these are just kind of some things that I've experienced as being important things to think about as you're designing that user experience, as you kind of go through the different steps of concept and design development to implementation with the input of developers. So first is selecting the right tool or medium. Um, the the most important thing I think is to be strategy first. So this is instead of being technology led, where you start off by just thinking of what kind of technology you want to use there, what's like kind of buzzworthy or trending, but instead you want to first start off with thinking about what are your goals and who is the audience or the community there. So in other words, we want to be picking the technology to match the audience and not the other way around, because not every trend or every technology will work with every audience. Um, and so, for example, we've seen most recently that a lot of clients might just say something like, oh, let's find a way to incorporate AI. Can we just like include an AI photo booth? But there may be, in fact, instances where it doesn't even make sense to use technology, where it could create more distance instead of connection. And so it's really important to start off by thinking about the goal of what you're trying to do, and then after that thinking about how you can use technology in a way to achieve those goals. And then a kind of sub bullet within that is to select the right platform after selecting the right tool. So say you've decided to create a virtual immersive environment for connecting this particular audience. Um, and so in that case, you then have to think about what is the right virtual platform to use. So you could use something like Roblox or Fortnite that already have kind of a built-in audience. So even between those two platforms, they would have different demographics in their most typical users. Roblox tends to skew a little younger, a little more creative, while Fortnite attracts players who are a little bit older and may enjoy more action. On the other hand, for a previous project that I've worked on, we ultimately decided to pick a custom created platform instead of using one of those, because there's some limitations in Roblox or Fortnite. For example, it doesn't let you link out to other external websites that easily. And so in that case, we worked with another vendor who had kind of their own custom developed platform. And then we completely customized that with our own designs and creative, and then added on new custom built features as well. So that a more custom solution can offer a lot more flexibility in terms of what you're trying to achieve, but sort of at the expense of not having that built-in audience. And so, as I said, it kind of really comes back to the goals that you're trying to achieve there. And then content. Um, this one, content is like such a big piece of whatever you're trying to build, whether it's augmented reality or virtual immersive platforms. Um, I think a really important learning for me there is collaborating with communities for authentic storytelling. So, as a designer or creator, it's just not really possible for me to tell a story in the same way that someone who experienced it firsthand would be able to do so. And so the impact of being able to like actually hear the voice of someone who experience the stories that you're trying to tell, or to connect audios to specific visuals. That's something that I think like whenever it's possible to really integrate these people into the entire process. And then thirdly, considering the ease of use. So there are a lot of kind of learning kind of not barriers, but people have to go through a couple of hoops to get accustomed to the experience, especially if they haven't done it before. So we have to make sure that whatever we're building, the experience has been tested by a couple of other users who might not have done it before, but designing that kind of onboarding or instructions process so that it's really quickly and easily understood. Um, Another thing to consider is making use of common UI elements or interactions, such as gestures, like the swiping gesture that's so common. These are things that everyone is accustomed to and is kind of a part of like basic vocabulary. And so it would be a lot easier to utilize these rather than coming up with something completely new. And then another part of this is making us coming in with the expectation that people will not be spending an extended time with whatever you're building, even though you might have taken months to create something. In reality, people will likely spend like maybe at most 10 or 15 minutes if you're lucky. And so that kind of goes hand in hand with making the onboarding process really easy and making sure that everything can be played with or experienced in very short and is easily accessible amounts of time. And then shareability is another consideration. That one is pretty obvious, so I won't dive too deeply into that, but that is like one really great way to just kind of extend or expand your experience to a much wider audience, even if they might not be able to see it firsthand. Um, and then accessibility and device compatibility. So a couple of different considerations here, but accessibility, for example, we have to design for different senses. So in the augmented reality neighborhood tour that I mentioned, we simultaneously had visuals, we had captions, we had the audio tour, so just like kind of all of these different ways to engage your content so that there's a lot of built-in flexibility there. And then designing for a global audience. So there are, in the case of like a virtual platform, you might have visitors from all over. And so thinking about like the different languages that you might want to have content captioned or dubbed in, um, and then also planning for different levels of tech engagement. This is something that might be more applicable to the augmented reality side. But for example, we often have um, assistants on site when we're activating so that we can kind of help out people who are less familiar with the tech and kind of just really guide them through the process, but just not coming in with the assumption that people necessarily already have experience with these platforms. And then finally, device compatibility. So just kind of as much as possible, designing with the built-in flexibility for different and older devices across different um, platforms. And then testing, that's super important. So testing early and often, again, with different devices and users with different levels of expertise. But that's definitely a lesson that I learned in terms of the in-person environment being different from the testing environment as well. So just kind of building in a lot of time throughout the process, and then that enabling you to iterate really quickly and build on learnings to improve. And then lastly, just making sure that the experience is fun. So often you can get kind of like pigeonholed or like really deep, sorry, not pigeonholed, you can get really deep into building out and designing the experience to the extent that you kind of forget the perspective of the user. And so regularly it's important to zoom out and just kind of think from the perspective of, is it fun? Because if it's not fun, people will not be using your product no matter um, how much effort you've put into creating it. Finally, I wanted to just quickly go through some overarching trends that we're seeing for future directions of these emerging technologies, just kind of things to keep in mind as you explore them further and the impact that they might have in the future. So, the 5 trends that I wanted to quickly talk about are how generative AI is enhancing workflows and user experience, mixed reality headsets gaining more momentum, new paradigms for user interaction, improvements in positioning, mapping, and body tracking. And then finally, for designers, this one is a really cool development, the introduction of more and more no or low code tools. So in general, these developments are making experiences a lot more immersive and enjoyable for the audience, and or cheaper and easier for designers and producers to create. So that means that these platforms will become more ubiquitous, and then we will increasingly find different communities coming together here. So with generative AI, we are seeing a lot of these tools for text and image generation. So I've personally been using them a lot for the early concept development stages with the AR and immersive virtual environments. There's a lot of 3D asset creation involved there, and AI still has a ways to go in that area. But as that kind of develops, we're going to see that becoming a lot easier for people to create, and the barrier to entry is going to become a lot lower. Um, and then we are also seeing a lot more AI powered tools in some of the social AR platforms that I've spoken about. So, TikTok Effect House, for example, has generative effects, or Snapchat Lens Studio also has the ability to create filters with ChatGPT prompting. Um, and then mixed reality headsets gaining more momentum. So that one where we saw kind of Apple release their Vision Pro and Meta release their Quest 3. And so we're seeing these significant investments into mixed reality interfaces by major tech companies. Um, what that means is that these headsets will continue to become more comfortable and cheaper for people to use, which means that they will become more ubiquitous. Another thing to think about is that these headsets are going to create new ways of communication and connection. So, for example, Apple's Vision Pro personas was one way that they tried to address that. Um, it was, I think, a little awkward for most people, and this kind of challenge is not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it's something that designers will have to address in bridging that gap between a person being immersed in their virtual environment or in a headset and then switching to chatting to someone next to them IRL. But on the other hand, this also offers new opportunities. So, for example, imagine if you could meet someone at a networking event, and then your AR glasses can pull up some overlapping interests and tell you what would be the best talking points. Third, spatial computing creating new paradigms for user interaction. So this is kind of a follow on from the previous trend, but the introduction of spatial computing is really exciting because it just allows us to think about human computer interaction in a whole new way. Um, so, for example, for Apple, in place of hand controllers, they've introduced new interaction behaviors like eye tracking, hand tracking, or voice control. These may take some time for people to adjust to, but they're a lot more intuitive and similar to our natural movements and behaviors in the real world. And so they're going to open up a lot of fresh possibilities in how we interact with people and objects digitally. And then fourth, improvements in body tracking and scene understanding. So social AR platforms, they're constantly releasing new features and tools. Their understanding of the body tracking on the front camera side as well as on the back camera side in being able to accurately understand different elements of a scene. All of that is constantly improving so that they can kind of figure out what is a wall versus a floor or a ceiling, etc. So all of this is just kind of showing a trend towards a fuller understanding of our environment so that we can make these digital elements blend in a lot more seamlessly with the physical. And then beyond social AR, we're also seeing this in more general AR developer tools. So Google, for example, released the geospatial API, or Niantic, which is known for creating Pokemon Go. They have a web AR development platform called Eighth Wall. And they also released something called Lightship VPS, which makes it a lot easier for people to anchor their content, and just generally for these systems to understand your position and mapping within a space. And so we are actually seeing, because it's becoming so much easier for people to use these tools, we're seeing them come into play a lot more in real life events where people come together. For example, in football stadiums or concerts, places where there are large gatherings of people, they are kind of creating this extra layer for people to improve their experiences. And then finally, with more and more no or low code tools for building these experiences, it's easier than ever for designers to play around with them and explore them. For example, the Geospatial Creator that I mentioned by Google, there's a plugin with Adobe Aero that you can try where you can create 3D animations and then just drag and drop them into an outdoors physical space in this kind of like Google Maps view, which is super cool. Um, and then there's also Snapchat Lens Studio or Meta Spark Studio, which have been around for a while. And then Fortnite Creative Mode, Roblox Studio, Unity, and Unreal. All of these are platforms that you can play around with as a designer. And even though you will still need scripting to create more complex game logic, there's still a lot of fun things you can do with building a world and exploring. And there are also options like visual scripting that you can use to kind of make that code writing a lot easier. And so, with all of that said, I think that with connecting people, it's still super important for us to meet in real life, and there's nothing that can kind of replace that. And in our industry, I'm still seeing a lot of experiences being grounded in physical space, but the ability to augment these with digital components or to kind of bring them to a broader audience with a virtual extension is bringing really exciting possibilities for all of us to connect in a wider way. And so, with that said, I would invite all of you to imagine what the possibilities are and comment your thoughts below. Thank you.